From the Greek pantheon, we have the story of Gordius, who, after hearing the oracle proclaim that the next who passed through the gates would become king, drove his ox cart through the gates and was made the ruler. His son Midas was so excited and overjoyed that he made a monument out of the ox cart, tying it to the gate with a tangle of fibers that were hard to untie. So as time passed, the decree came down that the person who could untie the fibers would be, in fact, the next king. And Alexander strove to do that, but could not untie them. It occurred to Alexander that to separate the fibers, to meet the conditions of becoming the ruler, he could, in fact, take his sword and cut through the knot. And thus we have the idea of the Gordian Knot. The Gordian Knot is a metaphor for when things are very tangled, very difficult, hard to overcome, and that is the kind of grief that we are living in today. That is the kind of grief that we are faced with when we are dealing with not only our personal losses, which are part of every day and perhaps a little accelerated in these times when people are living under so many different kinds of stresses. Our personal losses, our communal losses, our societal losses, the losses of ideals, such as our fears about what is happening to our nation and its democratic dreams. So with all of this, we have this big knot that Mark and Miranda and Linda have painted so well for us. And I think it's important to think about that and to just allow us to acknowledge that we are holding this big, tangled mass of grief. On Friday, I was very sad to hear the news of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death, and I heard in so many people who reached out during those next hours how it felt like one too many things. Yesterday I felt sad. Last night I felt sad. This morning I felt sad. And I want to say that because our society does not actually support us feeling sad. Our society would rather we feel angry or upset, or that we push it aside and put on a stiff upper lip and move forward. But we are living amid times of very complicated grief. And so with that, one of the things we know is that it's important for us to acknowledge, to take time, to make space for our grief and for the grief of others as well. All of those who study such things will tell us that our grief is part of the natural flow of life, and that it is probably only going to undo us if it is unexpected, if it is overwhelming, or if it is minimized too soon. So it's in that spirit that we have created this service for you, because as a society, we really do not acknowledge grief. We want to have some kind of litmus test that says that people who live right shouldn't really have to be sad. But this is one of those times when we know that is not true. So there is a psychologist named Megan Devine, and she's one who knows a lot about grief. She now calls herself a grief advocate. Her world imploded after her husband or her partner drowned before her, and she says we have to be careful about what we do about our grief and the grief of others. We have to honor our right to grieve and to move through grief and to continue to be present to grief, not to try to make it go away, but to see it as a companion in our days. And those are certainly the times we are living in. Toxic, Devine says, is a new recipe in our culture which combines the old puritanical idea that if something bad happens to you, it's because of something that you did to deserve it, with a misinterpretation, she says, of the Eastern philosophies, which says that you just need to detach from your grief and then just let it go as fast as possible. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur together, these are in the Jewish calendar the days of awe. And Devine says that we have to learn a new relationship with grief, because grief gives us the ability to express and live in that place of awe at the things that can be terrible in this world, and also awe at what can be beautiful as well. Grief, she says, is the lens that allows us to do that. In other words, the knot is cut, but the two sides of the knot still are there beside us. I was gifted with a remarkable book this summer. It's called The Beauty in the Breaking by Michelle Harper. She's an emergency room doc who chronicled the way her personal losses, the loss of innocence in an abusive childhood, relationships that failed, and the truly tragic things she saw in the ER, all tangled together into this big mass that she then had to figure out how to live with. And her journey through that is truly remarkable. The solution to the Gordian knot of grief is not to try to untie it or to tell all of us that we just need to get over it, but it is really to acknowledge first that it is there and to give it the space in our own hearts and in the hearts of others. Megan Devine writes, "Spiritual and meditative practices are not meant to erase pain. That's a symptom of our pain-avoidant culture, and it's not an accurate portrayal of the practices themselves. Spiritual practices in any tradition, including mindfulness in its many forms, are meant to help you live what is yours to live, not to make you rise above it. These tools are meant to help you feel companioned inside your grief. Rather than help us rise above being human, teachings in any true tradition teach us to become more human, more connected, not less." So this is an important piece for us as a religious community, as a group of people who come together, faithful that we are better together than we are alone, to know that there can be this kind of companionship in grief. And I have watched that for more than a decade through our grief group, as people form very powerful bonds with one another in that new knowledge that they have of this awe-inspiring world in which we live, that their grief has given them to see. In these times, it's important for us to remember that grief and sorrow are part of the human journey, and yet it is like saying that water is essential to life. A trickle of water, a drink of water, a draught of water, a rivulet of water even, but an ocean of water, a torrent of water can feel like more than we can handle. So here are a few things that we can do together as a community and that we can honor in one another. We can hear that still small voice that Miranda spoke of in ourselves. We can allow ourselves time to be sad about the things that there are to be sad about, and this world gives us many around us. We can find others to walk with us, to be our companions, who won't say, "Oh, you just need to get over it," or "just be joyful," because sometimes we need to be sad. We can allow ourselves to be actually sad and not mask it in being irritable and angry and critical and mean to one another, which is something that we're all prone to do. We can feel our feelings and not couch and cloak them all in some kind of intellectual debate about what we really have to be sad about or whose fault it is or what we need to do, but just allow ourselves to be present to the two halves of that knot that are still sitting there beside us. We can listen to one another, again, not to advise, not to fix, but just to listen. And we can recognize one another among this ever-growing community of mourners who know that no matter what happens in the coming months, we now know more about the world that we live in, and that knot remains with us and will be ours to hold no matter what. We can name what is true for us and hear what is true for others. Megan Devine says, "Grief no more needs a solution than love needs a solution. We cannot triumph over death or loss or grief. They are immovable elements of being alive. If we continue to come at them as if they are problems to be solved, we will never get the solace or the comfort we need to not be completely overwhelmed in our deepest pain." In these times, let us remember that we can honor ourselves and what we are feeling, our own sadness. We can honor the sadness of others. We can honor the fact that no matter what happens, we know that we are living in a society in which tragic things have happened and continue to happen, and we cannot push those out of our awareness. Let us trust that we are strong enough to hold our own grief, to acknowledge the grief of others, and that despite all of that, we can find awe and solace and resources for living in times like these.